Thank you to the Digital Democracies Institute for inviting me and for welcoming me here. I thought that because it's my first time speaking here, I would actually talk a little bit about the kind of work that I do, which is to study and theorize the intersection of ecology, media, and culture, and then weave that into the subtitle of my talk. So let me share my screen. And I've changed the subtitle to add the word coups. It looks ambitious to cover all that. So the first part will be more theoretical, to introduce the framework that I bring to these issues. And I'll just very briefly touch on the book on cinema, my more recent work on digital images and on images in general. So why ecologies in the plural? And in fact, why three ecologies? In 2013, I published this book, Ecologies of the Moving Image, in which I aimed to reconstruct the history of cinema, the moving image, through an ecological lens, and at the same time to reconstruct ecology in ways that make it not just about the world out there, the physical and biological world studied by scientists, but also the world in here, in our experience, in our social relations, and in our perception of it all. Since then, I've deepened the philosophical basis of that book, began applying it to digital media and digital images, and applied it also to understanding the very nature of what an image is and how we humans have related to them. So I start with three images, partly inspired by Félix Guattari's book, The Three Ecologies. Why three? Because it's better than two. We've had a lot of critique of dualisms by feminists, by phenomenologists, by post-colonial theorists, intersectional theorists, and various others over the decades. So why three ecologies? The problem for me with Guattari's idea is that it's not grounded in a kind of ontology that helps us in the way that Alfred North Whitehead's work does. Whitehead started with this idea of the bifurcation of nature as being a problem. It's sort of the primary dualism that distinguishes between the things of our experience, the rain, sun, clouds, and trees, and the fact of our experiencing them as wetness, as light, as beauty, as joy, so the how of our experience. The bifurcation of nature refers to this, to the idea that there are primary properties of the natural world that science can study, and they are real, whereas our experience is kind of secondary, maybe less real. The problem with that isn't that it's a hierarchy that should be reversed, it's that it's inaccurate. The what of our experience and the how of our experiencing it are intimately connected in a single continuum, according to Whitehead, and he helps us think that through. And I see him as part of a long tradition of thinking about the world processually and relationally, so that the world is not objects in space, some of which are alive and have special properties, and we kind of move around in space, but rather the world, the universe is made up of events which are relational occasions of experience. And these events cumulatively build the world. So the standard model is sort of Cartesian Newtonian. And again, I'm going to whip through some of this, apologies. Whitehead's alternative is that the smallest particle of universe is an event of experience, characterized by a bipolarity with a subject pole and an object pole. Subjectivity arising in relation to and responding to objects in its world. Everything is that. So the universe consists of drops of experience, as William James called them, that create unities that concrete, they become concrete, they become actual, which then become objects for other subjectivities to experience. So there's a kind of duality that's built into everything. An event of relating is the smallest particle of the universe. You hear my words and you interpret them, becoming yourself, having interpreted what you just heard. A tree responds to rays of sunlight, extending its branches ever so slightly in their direction. Steel molecules mix with air and water to produce rust, etc. Some becomings are fast, some are as slow as the movement of continental shelves on a geologically average day. Each of them is an event co-implicated with subjectivation responding to objects, objectivation, becoming objects, becoming subjects, by prehending, grasping those objects in some way, making sense of them, responding to them, in turn concressing to produce the universe at every micro kind of step of the process. All right, so how do I get three ecologies out of this? Well, the objectivations become our object worlds, those material ecologies that we can study from their outside. We can measure them. Scientists do that supremely well. The subjectivations become our subject worlds, our social ecologies, where we negotiate our own agency, our ability to act in relation to others that we perceive as agents. So we negotiate agency, and that's where politics comes from, that's where ethics comes from. In between is where everything actually occurs. It's the felt perceptualities, our life worlds, our sensory perceptual interactions, sensing and being sensed, seeing and being seen, as well as the sensory extensions and mediations of our mediatized world. Our media change the way we perceive things, what we perceive, what we don't perceive, and so on. So in a sense, there are three ecologies in one: the what world, object world, the who world, and the how world. And everything sort of revolves around what happens in that how world. The social and the material get shaped within that. All right, I'll skip this. The other main source that I draw on is Peircean semiotics. Peirce, we know in media studies for his triad of icon, index, and symbol. I draw on him at the more fundamental level of his basic triadic classification, which is a kind of metaphysical thing, which maps onto Whitehead. Whitehead saw perception as occurring in three layers, in a sense. There's the way in which everything conforms or relationally attunes to the movement of the world as constituted by its feeling tones. Humans do it, any organism does it, arguably anything. Then there are sensory organisms like us that perceive discrete sensory things, sights, sounds, colors, etc. And he calls that presentational immediacy. It's very discrete, it's based in right now, whereas the causal efficacy is this sort of forward movement, this momentum of the world. Together, they're synthesized into our worlds through what he calls symbolic reference. It's a constructive synthesis of the two, but that's where error comes about. Our intuitions, our feelings don't always jibe with what we are discretely sensing, for instance. And that maps onto Peircean semiotics, which sees there being a qualitative firstness, as he calls it, to everything, a secondness of actual direct relations, encounters between things. This is what scientists study, the causal determination of one thing causing another. And then there's the mediation of those encounters through context, through interpretation, representation, habit, rule, principle, law, and so forth. So mind and matter they're part of this continuum, this spectrum. Matter is effet mind. Inveterate habits becoming physical laws, as Peirce put it. All right, so these three dimensions, the thing in itself, an encounter with that thing, and the mediation of that by a broader context is what I bring to the study of the moving image, to cinema, to film. I ask, what is this thing called cinema? What are moving images? How do we encounter them? How do we experience them? What is their impact upon and meaning in the world? How does that encounter play itself out in the larger world? And very briefly, I answer that moving images are lures that invite us to experience worlds that are object worlds, things that we take for granted, that we move around in, that relate to the object worlds of our world in some way. They're subject worlds where agency gets negotiated, and typically it's a kind of anthropomorphism of human characters that we understand to be like us as we watch. And then there's that whole in-between world where the negotiation takes place between objectivity and subjectivity. That's the world, the film world, the cinema world. How do we experience it? As spectacle, that's the firstness, that audiovisual stuff that shimmers in front of us and we feel it. Then there's that secondness, the sequentiality of one thing happening after another, and we connect them to create a storyline. And then there's everything we bring to it, which is the referentiality of what we see on the screen as it relates to our experience of the world at large, the universe, our lives, places, people, countries, and so on. And then there's that broader impact of moving images, which is material, and that's being studied now by eco-materialist analyses of cinema. It's perceptual, which is primarily where our experience of cinema takes place. And it's social in that there's a kind of shaping of the social world that occurs through it, of cinematic industries, national cinemas, and so on and so forth. All right. This diagram comes from the book. I won't go over it. So it's a layered kind of triadism. Now, where I've taken this is to the study of the digital image, and at the same time back to the study of what images are in their primordiality. And that's where I'm going to go in the next few minutes. Very breezily breeze through the whole first half of this book, The New Lives of Images. So I define an image as a sensorially perceivable form that produces an effect in part through its likeness or resemblance to something known to be elsewhere or elsewhen. Something that's not there, that's being brought there by the image. So an image is an event. It's a relational event that connects us, if we're participating in it, through that image form to other times, other places. And in that connection, it constructs the world for us. In Persian language, images are iconic, at least in part. So there's that sign, that image vehicle that refers to something. We think of that as referring to a sunset, maybe our idea of a sunset for those to whom it does that. Images in that sense mediate between here, now, and elsewhere, elsewhen. And one of the questions I bring to our relationship to images is, where is the locus of agency in the relationship between humans, images, and the beyond human, whatever that more than human world is? So very superficially, I create a kind of typology of images based on that locus of agency. There are images that I call animate images. They are social agents, corporeal and energetic, with which our relationship is that of engagement, participation, obligation, and negotiation, potentially of inhabitation. Another category is the ideal image, where agency is seen as transcendent. It's beyond the human image system. The image at best allows a kind of indirect access to it. It acts as a portal to something beyond it, something that is otherwise inaccessible to us. So these are cosmograms, as they're sometimes called, that portray an image of the cosmos that we can see through the image, but the image is, again, a portal to it, an icon in a sense. Traditions of portraiture kind of get at this a little bit, landscape portraits. Traditions of the sublime get at this as well. Thirdly, there is the reversal of that, where agency is not transcendent, but immanent to the creator of the image, the artist. This is the regime of the art object, where the image is valued for its expressivity, the virtuosity of its craft, style, beauty, novelty, insight, or creative genius embodied in it, etc. Of course, every image can partake in different regimes. So the Mona Lisa is not just valued as an expression of its creator, but also there's an ideality, an ideal image that it reaches out toward, as does every maybe Chinese or Japanese landscape painting. There's something that it's trying to do beyond just being that expression of the artist. Fourth category is the world picture. The term is Heidegger's, which is a little bit like the ideal image, with the difference that here agency is actually part of the technology, the technical apparatus that provides mastery over the image through the art of copying reality. It's the image as facsimile that reproduces or documents reality. So documentary photography and film. The world picture in Peirce's language is built on indexicality, and in the form of modern science develops this into a kind of reversible set of networks of indexicality, as Bruno Latour refers to it in his important essay, Irreductions. The moving image sets into motion the world picture, but it also draws on the other regimes, the animate image, the ideal image, the expression image. It's a composite whose essence is the capacity both to reproduce motion and to enlist motion toward other ends, the ends of expression, documentation, idealization, and animation. All right. I have this big sort of list of comparative things that I build in my book, and I'm not going to get into it, except that the one at the far right is the digital image world, and that's where I want to go over the next few minutes. So what are digital data images and digital image worlds? How do we encounter them? What is their impact upon and meaning in the world? So those same pragmatic kind of processual questions at that triadic level. Digital images are slippery morphing images, as Francesco Cassetti has called them. They're moldable, modulable, remediable. They vacillate between imprint, indexical trace of the world, and artifice, between object and process or flow. Of all those terms, I like the term liquid image because it suggests this kind of slippery fluidity and infinite modulation, mutation, and recombination. These slippery morphing images follow a set of competing logics that underpin digital media, intensify the possibility for image manipulation, as well as a kind of addictive quality to the image, but they can also bring us closer to the world. These logics unfold and are shaped within broader contexts that people have referred to in various terms. Let's call it global, neoliberal, postmodern, transnational, biopolitical, etc. capitalism. We can debate each of these things. But let's get back to our pragmatic questions. So what are digital image worlds? They're networked digital data systems that invite us to experience, move, and navigate within and shape object worlds, subject worlds, and life worlds. Each of these is different. It builds on cinematic life worlds and other kind of mediated worlds in very specific ways. And these worlds are set on two competing trajectories, one leading to convergence with greater connectivity, developing across different worldings, platforms, apps, news sharing around the world, etc., ultimately potentially toward a kind of networked planetarity, the kind that Benjamin Bratton talks about as the stack. The other being divergent, more and more centrifugal, resulting in a kind of echo-chambered tunnel verse of different worlds. How do we experience them? We don't watch, listen, or read. Instead, we experience them more like swimming or navigating through a multidimensional network of ever-opening spaces as we click, like, link, tag, comment, etc., navigating through this multi-platformed, menu-operated, discontinuous database of emergent structures of meaning, feeling, identity, relationality, and possibility. And there's a kind of demonstrative performance of mediation that we engage in, which creates a certain kind of restlessness, a certain insatiability, a need for continual participation. So in terms of our experience, the digital image world is always on. It's a continual attention stream. We can leave it when we go to bed, but then we wake up to see what we've missed. It's a hyper spectacle that's continuously unfolding, calling for participation of one kind or another, for attention, essentially. In our interaction with digital media, they connect us to people, institutions, and worlds in ways that can become more integrated, also can become more fragmented and discontinuous. And in terms of their thirdness, there's a hyper-referentiality that affords possibilities of geographically very extended publics, but also very discontinuous publics, which makes life kind of disembodied, deplaced, and fragmented, and in many ways unreliable. But again, there are different possibilities here. What's their impact in the world? The material ecologies are pretty bad, actually. The colossal overproduction of ecologically indigestible substances. These systems that we rely on, these massive server farms, the use of energy, the mountains, cities of e-waste, and so on. But there's also this kind of maybe embryonic hyperinformatic sensification of the world, or sensientification. I think that's Jennifer Gabers's world or somebody's. So there's this media industrial cycle that's production, waste, etc. This is from Cy Taffel, but there's the potential for becoming more aware of the places where we live, of what's going on. Our Google Maps, for better or for worse, can help us navigate our cities with information we didn't used to have, etc. There's the Internet of Animals that follows animals around to know what they're doing and so on. Is that surveillance? Is it population management? Is it a kind of hyper-mediated, multi-species sentience? It kind of depends on how it's used, on the politics of it. With perception, digitality has thickened, animated, immersed, and enlivened our perception within geographically unbounded relational networks, but it's also clouded our perception of the algorithmic structuring and shaping of that participation. And I'll come back to that. With sociality, it's extended the possibilities for social life while making them both less reliable and more prone to homophily, radicalization, epistemic tribalism, etc. So there's a kind of differentiation and stratification that does and can occur through digital media. So when you bring all this together, I like to think in terms of the question, what happens when you take the slippery, morphing, liquid image of digital media and send it moving into the global flow of digital data, shaped by two prominent features of the media world: the democratization, the mass distribution of image making, not just consumption, but production, bottom up in a sense, and the algorithmic control and surveillance, which we might think of as top-down management. It's more lateral, more networked, financialized, algorithmic, etc., by what sometimes has been called the neoliberal corporate state, maybe multiple states, maybe competing actors within that. and set that into motion within this more than human world that we live in? That's sort of the big summary question. In the essay that introduces the Routledge Handbook of Ecomedia Studies, Antonio Lopez and I posit ecomedia as inherently reflexive about these things in a way that media as a term is not. Ecomedia is indexical of media's inherent ecological condition, which makes possible communication and sustenance, but it's also tethered to social and ecological degradation. Ecomedia attends to media's double ground, its content and its materiality. The book in your hands, the screen, the metals, plastics, electricity, and production circuits that undergird its creation. With digital media, ecomedia takes the data image to be not just a doubled image, but a kind of double image. There's the image seen and sensed, the image that results from the sensing and interpretation, so that Persian interpretant. There's the machine-readable data file that subtends the image, and the machinic networks that support and enable that machine readability, etc. Each of these is both material and ideal. Even the interpretation of an image by me, by you, by fan groups and engaged publics takes place within a material hardware and a software. Neurocognitive systems, our brains, our bodies, all these technologies that extend them. The data file itself represents a kind of ideality of zeros and ones, the binary data. Conceived tri-ecologically, each of these is not only material and ideal, but also perceptual or mediatic. It's an interface that does something, that grasps, prehends, and transforms its objects, in particular ways of subject making and object making. All right. So here's my proposal, is that instead of thinking of our time as the Anthropocene, which essentializes humanity as if we're all equally responsible for our situation, or the Capitalocene, which kind of essentializes capital, making it a unified monolith we can do nothing about because it's so all-pervasive. What if we thought of our time and our situation as the Mediocene, because digital media are the network data systems by which we collectively make sense of the world? They're not innocent. They have a deeply material impact upon the world, which is always also a social impact, but they're also the way we can know what impact we have on the world. And they define how we learn and communicate about the world, about ourselves, and about our mutual impact on each other. Mediation is fundamentally what's at stake. Media alter and extend our senses. They enable us to sense and interact with the world in particular ways. So the question is, how shall we mediate our relations with each other and with our non-human others to produce a habitable and desirable world in common? Thank you for making it through the first part. The second will be short. So I'll explain that bottom phrase in a moment. Where are we today with our material, social, and perceptual ecologies? I'm going to suggest that there are 5 important trends that are converging around us. First, there's the return of a kind of fascist-leaning, patriarchal, or strongman authoritarian nationalism, which is not new at all. There's a kind of continuity. We can think of the military regimes of mid-20th century Germany, Italy, Spain, Portugal, Brazil, Greece, Chile, Argentina, Uruguay, Guatemala, going into the late 20th century, and many other countries, to the later attempted or successful authoritarian nationalist state capture by elected politicians like Putin, Bolsonaro, Orban, Trump, and others. Second is a neoliberal hollowing out of the state, also not new, with its own continuity and cyclicality going back to the Gilded Age in the US, to the Chicago Boys, the Pinochet regime, where the Chicago Boys economists tried out their strategies, the Reagan and Thatcher revolutions in the US and UK, the shock therapy of the post-Soviet world, all of which could be equated with the so-called Washington consensus of fiscal discipline, privatization, deregulation, and trade liberalization. But I want to make the case that this is what we see now is not your mama's or your papa's neoliberalism. It's not the version taken from Margaret Thatcher, Ronald Reagan, and wrapped in socially progressive modifications by Clinton, Blair, Chrétien, and others. We're long past that and well into another phase. What's happened since then, among other things, is the dramatic growth of digital technology, and specifically its oligarchization since the 2000s, which is new, but also follows the model of earlier waves of rapid colonization, capitalization of territory, of minerals, including fossil fuels. This is 100 years ago. The wealthiest people in the US were pretty well all oil, steel, railroads, shipping, etc. Some were banking magnates. And over the decades, the wealthiest people in the world, railroads, oil, steel, automobiles. So with digital media, we have the same sort of Wild West phase going on before being tamed, at least in part, to serve the public interest. So that's the big question. How do we do that? Tech oligarchs make up that big blue patch of American billionaires. With Elon Musk, it's really about three quarters, the blue and pink part of that map. The fourth trend is this return of naked land and power grabs, this kind of brazen and, I argue, multipolar neo-imperialism, most obvious in the case of Putin's attempted Ukrainian land grab, justified by neo-imperial narratives about Ukrainians not being real people and so on. I won't get into the details there of his Prime Minister Medvedev's statements. We can speak of China as well in this context, but it's all been launched into a higher orbit with Trump's rapid-fire signaling of a newly imperial regional strategy of a USA from the Panama Canal to the Arctic, by withdrawing US support for humanitarian and civil society initiatives around the world, and by launching economic wars against Canada and Mexico, threatening former allies like Norway. Trump has signaled to the world a new configuration, a multipolar, neo-imperial one in which oligarchic empires can dominate their spheres of influence in whatever way they like, and that democracy has nothing to do with it and power has everything. So Ukraine and Taiwan, like Canada, Greenland, and Panama, are starting moves toward a global realignment in which the warming Arctic is poised to play the role that the Americas played in a much earlier wave of neo-imperial sort of global gold rush, if you will. The fifth unmistakable trend I'm going to call a growing series of end Holocene advancements: climate destabilization, creating weather disasters, continuing ecological breakdowns, energy transition pressures leading to a scramble for remaining fossil fuels, and a simultaneous scramble for newly important critical metals like lithium and rare earth minerals. You may have heard that Ukraine might have to give up the territory it's losing to Russia so that Donald Trump can get some of those rare earth minerals. The toxification of ecosystems through microplastics and so on and so forth, viral outbreaks. Whether to call this the Anthropocene is a debate for geologists, but I think it's enough to recognize that the changes are likely to end the 12,000 year or so period of relative stability called the Holocene that provided the comfort zone. You are here in this period at the end of it for the emergence and flourishing of what we call civilization. If our material ecologies are a disaster beginning to happen, our social ecologies are increasingly marked by a gap between the global climate precariat sent moving from their homes to encounter borders, security checkpoints, detentions, and fear, and the social worlds that they run up against and that they tend to be locked out of. So what about our perceptual or medial ecologies? Now, as we probably all realize, those ecologies are being dominated by media czars who shape the algorithms that structure our mediations. They do it in their own interest, without transparency, accountability, or oversight, with the overarching goal of capturing our attention. The recent US election is a case in point. Trump's reelection, like the reelections of other strongmen around the world, but more powerful because of his mastery of media. Trump is a kind of shaman of the digital media disorder, controlling popular attention through a constant display of raging contradictions, at the same time representing wealth and power and representing the attempted takedown of wealth and power, the deep state, and so on, channeling an anti-institutionalist anger fueled by largely but not entirely baseless claims that he himself engineers on a daily basis. Trump is a liquid emperor, an emperor of the liquid image, modulating his own image to keep us compelled by it, while being distracted by the many interpretive openings each one of those modulations renders possible. Let's say a few words about the other inspirational key player whose reshaping of global politics and of the global media sphere has been enormous in the last decade or so. Another leader obsessed with the projection of power, with fossil fuels, with manliness and traditional values, and with the politics of resentment. Putin's global ascent has been driven by the desire to make Russia great again. His use of technology has rebuilt the Soviet security and information apparatus for the digital age in order to be able to influence much of the rest of the world around this conflict between a kind of, neo-nationalist authoritarianism and the liberal state that, not your mama's neoliberalism, everything is being targeted there. This is the growth right here of European colonial empires. Watch that purple swath grow as the others decline. 1914, 1938, 1959, 1974, 2008. Starting 1492 from that little thing. Here's another map. So this European colonial empire started from that little shred of yellow around Moscow to become the largest territory on Earth. And it's the last remaining unreconstructed European colonial empire in the sense that it's had practically no internal, by scholars and academics, no internal critique of its colonial history, no reassessment or deconstruction of that. The ethnic minorities that were swallowed up and the indigenous peoples that were in many cases exterminated or close to it have had little voice in that system for centuries. Then there's the energy dimension of the war. Russia is a fossil fuel superpower. Half of its exports or more, about 60% before the full-scale invasion, came from its export earnings came from fossil fuels. It's simply because of sanctions redirected them to China, to Iran, to India, to the global south. There's also that move toward the Arctic, as well as this move toward Ukraine and the Black Sea. So back to the US, where we have Trump's unelected shadow president, the wealthiest man in the world, staging a kind of liquid coup, a digital coup through the hostile takeover of the federal government's finances. It's effectively the central nervous system of the US government, the civil service being dismantled, and so on. I think I have to wrap up, right? And he's not doing it just for himself, for his own profit. He's doing it because of his messianic belief in his own ability to save humanity. He's an obsessive, compulsive, grudge-bearing, empathy-lacking, Asperger's-driven egoist. And therefore, this messianic urge can be the pavement for the road to hell, which makes us all vulnerable. His acquisition of Twitter, now X, has arguably given him the world's largest unaccountable media mouthpiece that has fueled the growth of this right-wing media system, in which there was just research that came out a few days ago. Anyway, I won't get into it. In which all this kind of stuff becomes a free-for-all for making claims that don't have to be supported. So let's take a random respondent to Elon Musk, Ms. Pistolicious, with 8,000 followers, not that many, we'll come to another one in a minute, who writes, to the scientists crying about NIH grant overhead being capped at 15%, fuck all, y'all. You abuse the scientific process by creating pandemics and poison vaccines for them, killing and injuring millions of people and animals all over the world, then covering it all up with lies. You're greedy sociopaths and serial killers, not scientists. You did this to yourselves until the medical and climate scientists tell people the truth and apologize for all the lies, death, and destruction you caused. Go fuck yourselves. Okay, maybe she's not a super influencer, but then there are people like Tim Pool with 2.3 million followers, tweeting just a few days ago that after we destroy the Canadian economy, their will to resist will erode. We will then march in unopposed and deliver Canada to its rightful place as a territory of the US with no political representation. 3 million views since then, or almost 3 million. So, and Elon has actually retweeted, not that tweet, but others by him. So let me end with a couple of questions that focus in on what is happening in our medial perceptual ecosystem that I think are key questions for us to ask and to answer. What are the motivating images by which these political actors channel frustration, anger, and fear toward their techno-authoritarian solutions? And here I want to suggest that there's a kind of fascism in these motivating images, a desire to submit to authority, to an authority or power that would make the world safe again by defeating and destroying the otherness that is feared in the world. The double of that first question is, what are the algorithms and machinations that enable those images to resonate so widely? The response question is, what kinds of images linked to what kinds of imaginaries can challenge them without being tethered to the very institutional arrangements that are the cause of the frustration, which are now being taken away anyway. And the double of that is, what can be the governance systems that enable those images to resonate, multiply, and thrive? So how do we combat this globally at this level where the struggle is really taking place? In my book that's forthcoming from Stanford University Press, from Wendy's series, later this year it'll be out. I try to answer that in the second half by focusing in on some artists, some media people, some things happening in online media and so on, but it's just the beginning, and I'll end it there. Thank you.